6 minutes past 3 GMT. Welcome to the BBC World Service, The World Today, with Madeline Morris and Fergus Nichol.
The stories we cover are reaching out to a global audience.
Every hour on the hour, it brings you the top stories of the day.
It takes an utterly global view. There's nothing parochial or provincial about it.
It's impartial, it's accurate, and it really is the best of British broadcasting for a global audience.
Listening to the World Service is like opening a door from your little house on your street in London, in England, wherever it is, onto the rest of the world.
And that gives us the opportunity to make connections which no other radio station in the world can do.
It allows countries to be covered, issues to be debated, and voices to be heard from countries right around the globe.
We make a very strong effort at the World Service to tell the human side of the story so that people realize that the story isn't just standing on its own, but there are real people, real issues to which we are all connected as human beings.
Because what is it that links you, whether you live in Britain or Bangkok or Bombay or indeed here in Afghanistan? It's the stories of lives lived, it's about life and death, it's about families, it's about friends, and at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
I think it's incredibly important that the World Service actually goes out there and enables ordinary people in countries all over the world to bear witness, to testify, to talk about what has happened to them. A lot of what we now understand goes on, for example, in oppressive regimes, in closed cultures and societies, in war zones, happens because people have the bravery and the outlet, more importantly, to tell their stories.
It's all the different details from around the world that come together to build up a real picture of how the world works. And then hearing people in different parts of the world exchanging views, exchanging information, builds real understanding throughout the world.
It's very much an interactive service. It's a conversation between us and our listeners. And we'd like you to be part of our listeners as well, joining all the people around the world who talk to the BBC World Service day in, day out.
I was in Ghana recently and I met a young man and he was listening to the World Service on his mobile phone. And I asked him, what makes you listen to the World Service on your mobile every morning? He said, I must listen, I have to listen, because if I don't, I have no idea what my country is like. I need to compare it with the rest of the world, and your programmes let me do that.
One of the things I love about the World Service, whether I'm at work or listening to it at home, is that it does give you news from the UK, but it gives it to you in a completely different way. So let's take the troubles Gordon Brown's been having, particularly in the summer when it seemed that he might go. And the vast majority of our listeners outside of the UK were telling the listeners inside of it, hold on, from our perspective, Gordon Brown seems to be doing a pretty good job. So it's been fascinating for me to see the UK's experiences reflected back on itself by people on the outside looking in, and you get that every day on the World Service.
It's so important to me to know that we're not just living in a nation state, we're not just living in our little homes on our streets. We travel, we have interest in the world. I want to find out about what's happening artistically and culturally and politically all over the world.
Growing up in West Africa and listening to my father's shortwave radio, and I once asked him, why are you always listening to the BBC? And he says, well, if you want the facts, you tune into the World Service.
There are a number of ways you can listen to our programmes in crystal clear quality.
You can listen on digital radio,
Overnight on Radio 4.
My mum listens on it via digital TV,
on Freeview.
You can hear us via the internet.
bbcworldservice.com.
the website.
And if you miss any of the shows,
Get it on iPlayer.
We have our own free podcast which has our highlights on it.
All these different ways of being able to understand what's happening throughout the world.
The World Service brings you the information you need to better understand your world too. Understand your world too.
shows,
Get it on.
Understand your world too.
shows,
Get it on.
Understand your world brings you the information you need to better understand.
Our highlights which has free podcast, our own free lights on it.
might go,
Our highlights which has free podcast, our own free lights on it.
might go.
Our highlight
Brings you the information you need to better understand.
Our our own free podcast which has highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has highlights on it.
Brings you the information you need to better understand. Brings you the information you need and your world too.
Shows.
Get it on.
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 And your world too.
Which has free podcast, our own free, our highlights on it. Our highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has
too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
I play.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
I play.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
I play.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
I play.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
I play.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
which has free podcast, our own free, our highlights on it.
Brings you the information you need to better understand.
Our highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has
Might go.
our highlights on it. Our own free podcast which has
Might go.
our highlights.
Brings you the information you need to better understand. Brings you the information you need.
Our highlights which has free podcast, our own free
Might go.
highlights on it. Our highlights which has free podcast. We want to find.
Brings you the information you need to better understand too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
too. To better understand. Brings you the information you need.
Free podcast which has our own free highlights on it.
Might go.
Free podcast which has our highlights. Which has our free podcast, our own free.
Might go.
We want to find.
And your world too.
Shows.
Get it on.
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 And your world too. Brings you the information you need to better understand.
Our own free podcast, our highlights which has
Might go.
highlights on it. Our own free podcast, our highlights which has
Might go.
highlights on it. Our own free. We want to find. We want to find.
Too.
Shows.
And your world
Get it on.
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 too.
Shows.
We want to find.
Brings you the information you need to better understand too.
Shows.
Get it on. I play.
Too. And your world
Shows.
Get it on. I play.
too. And your world
Shows.
Get it on.
too. And your world
Shows.
Get it on.
too.
I play.
And your world
Shows.
Get it on. I play.
and your world
Shows.
Get it on. I play.
and your world
Shows.
Get it on.
too.
I play.
And your world
Shows.
Get it on.
too.
I play.
And your world too. And your world
Shows.
Get it on.
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 too. And your world
Shows.
Get it on.